Hi there. The Dungeon Master Roundtable you're about to watch is just one of a few topics that were covered during a live stream session hosted on the Dicely D&D Twitch channel, and the music you'll hear in this video was created by Tabletop Audio. And now I'll let our guests introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Fred Wheeler. I run the How to D&D YouTube channel. You'll find that I do mostly Dungeons and Dragons, but a lot of 5e stuff as well, a lot of instructional stuff, and I am on Twitter, Facebook, Discord if you actually want to talk to me in person. And I run Light Hall classes now. Would you believe it? I actually teaching it online. Taken me 5 years, but yeah, that's me.
How's it going? No fun allowed. And contrary to my name, I sometimes allow fun. I typically cover such things as running your tabletop role-playing games and running modules and things of that nature.
Alex. I am the Bear Bard, or Alex, as but normal people call me. I run Bear Bard Tales. We cover ttrpg stories from all over the sphere, mainly horror stories because that's what people want to hear, but we try to throw some glory stories in there and stuff and try to take, I guess, lessons from that. I try to add in a couple of tips here and there with there, but a lot of narration stuff within the space.
Hey there everybody, this is AJ Pickett. I am a full-time YouTuber that makes lore videos on Dungeons & Dragons and particularly monster ecology in a particularly easy listening and very thorough style with a lot of research put into them, so check it out.
Hi there, my name is Anthony Saul. I'm on the Play Dicely YouTube channel most of the time. Other times, I'm a professional dungeon master. You can find my services at fiverr.com/AnthonyTheDM.
Hello everybody, welcome back to our Dungeon Master Roundtable stream. Took me a few minutes there to kind of readjust the cameras because unfortunately Flutes Loot had to leave, so just had to resize everything.
Judging by the picture, it looked like he left the world.
That's what I was just thinking. It looked like a freaking memorial. I will remember you.
Oh gosh, our new guest, Sarah McLaughlin.
It actually looks a little bit like one of those mug shots that they take when you.
We should make some stock mug shots of each other.
Can we just stick like a number in there, just with his face? Because I think it would work.
Or a wanted poster.
F's in chat for
like
Flutes
any
Loot.
other day.
Like a town notice board, wanted, dead or alive.
Here's a link to his channel. Go give him a subscribe.
One subscribe equals one prayer.
Thoughts and prayers and subs.
Oh, welcome back, everybody. Holy. All right, let's move on to this next question here. Oh, God, I'm going to be laughing about that. Oh. All right, so we talked about meaningful decisions. We've talked about TPKs. Another defining feature of tabletop role-playing games is that players get to roll dice to help influence the game and add an element of luck and potential failure. So, a question for you all here. What dice rolling philosophies, do you bring to your table as a DM? And let's start with Bear Bard, and we'll go clockwise this time.
So you're asking me my philosophy?
Your philosophy on dice rolling.
So it's I'm kind of working. I'm probably like the least experienced DM here. And so I had the bad habit of fudging rolls at first, and I'm really trying to just like let it go and trust in dice rolls and adjust on that. But one thing that I hate, unnecessary dice rolls. It's just kind of a pet peeve of mine. I've had DMs that I bring this one example and I hate it so much. I was like, I don't usually get too invested, but like I was kind of annoyed. Like we were in this barn and it had
Let the hate flow through you, yes.
It had one metal wall and 3 wood walls. And I asked just to kind of look, what am I seeing? What am I looking at? And it was like, he made me roll. And so he's like, yeah, I didn't roll great. It was like a 7. And he's like, okay, yeah, this is a metal wall. I didn't notice that the other 3 walls were freaking wood. Like it's like I feel like there's got to be a base level of competency in things. You don't need to roll to pick up a glass of water. You don't need to, unless you're like bloodied up or whatever. But like there's basic things that I feel like just don't need to be rolled on, and that's dependent on the character. So I tend to, a lot of things I just won't roll on. Like obviously, like, certain things I will, but I do like to believe in like a base level of competency. Are they do they have a lot of wisdom or whatever? Do they have a lot of this? Do they have a lot of that? And just kind of how the character has role played and stuff up till that point. Well, it's like, what do I see on the table? There's a map. You don't need to roll to see that there's a map and a glass of water on that table. Now, are you trying to look to see if, like, what type of wood it is? I want to see if it's oak wood or something like that. Cool, fine, roll for that. But just this, I'd like to skip a lot of the basic level rolls because it just slows things down, and then it's just frustrating for people if they roll low. Okay, you rolled a 1 on a vision check. You didn't see the door in front of you. Like, you're gonna see the freaking door in front of you. So I tried to cut down on unnecessary rolls and make the rolls that, going back before, make the rolls that you do make more meaningful. Make it so you're rolling when it matters, and not just like you take a sip of your coffee, you rolled a 1, you burned yourself. That doesn't feel good to me. It doesn't feel good. So I'd like to cut down on the amount of rolls that you're doing. I guess comparatively to get other games I've played in.
Rolling athletics as you open the door. Oh, you rolled a 1? Yeah, you can't turn the knob.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been in games that were almost that bad. And it just, again, to me, it just slows it down. It takes what should be, an hour into 3 hours, and then you don't get to do anything meaningful in those the 2 hours that you have because you were rolling on everything.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great lesson for every DM to kind of acknowledge is like, not everything needs a roll. Every roll you do adds time to a session, and we got a lot of shit to do, eh?
Exactly.
No fun allowed.
Alrighty, my philosophy on dice rolls is as follows. With a combination of good tactics and good dice rolls, you will always succeed. With a combination of bad tactics and bad dice rolls, you will always fail. The gray area is if you have a combination of good tactics and bad dice, then you may succeed or may fail. If you've got a combination of bad tactics but good dice, you may succeed or you may fail. I think it's important that the dice are in the game because otherwise we could just be, running a narrative game, and there's far better games than D&D if you want a narrative-only game. But the whole point of there is to have dice for the randomness factor. And yeah, use the dice, but at the same time, use the common sense, much like the whole thing of, I look around. I'm not going to need you to roll a perception check to see that there are 4 walls, a ceiling, and a floor, right? Simple as that. But at the same time, there does need to be something to it. If you are looking for a specific trap, then yeah, maybe roll an investigation or whatever, right? But I think that dice need to be in the game. They need to be important, but they don't need to be everything. In fact, they should not be everything.
It's the only time you would ask for like a unnecessary roll is if, the characters are in some sort of darkness or obfuscation that would require them to roll to notice something, like a little twinkle of a light in the corner signifying a key to exit this permanently dark chamber or something like that,
Well, it's like the dice rolls, it's like, you do this when there's a challenge or when failure's interesting,
Yeah.
I'd just like to add that in 5th edition we have passive perception checks and things like that, where your character has got a default level of awareness in the environment, where if the DC of the check is below that, then they'll automatically succeed. That doesn't require any time requirement on their part. And I'd just like to add that all skills potentially are passive, so that you can expand on that, and once you get more confident in handling the substrata of what's going on, you can smooth and get rid of a lot of unnecessary dice rolls that way by just saying your character's good at that, they can do it.
And also, there's the vice versa of there are things that your characters cannot do ever, right? You as a character you've got a 20 strength, it doesn't matter. You cannot lift the 5,000 pound, ton rock in front of you, right? I know that some players want to believe that if they roll in that 20, they can succeed at everything in the world. But no, you cannot talk the king out of his pants. You cannot move the rock. You cannot, seduce the dragon. You cannot do these things, right?
You cannot
Depends on the game
emotionally
you're
move
playing,
the
I
rock.
think.
I'm gonna say, as a bard, I take issue with the seducing a dragon. Just by no, I totally agree with it. Yeah, I mean that's obviously like a big thing I harp on is like persuasion isn't mind control, and that carries across to pretty much all different things. People think if you roll a 20, you do whatever you want, and it's not. Especially with skill checks, there's usually no like critical failure, critical success. It's just is or isn't. The criticals are for combat generally.
Yeah, particularly if it's like, well, sometimes it really behooves you to write a note with some hidden information that character with their spectacular success has gotten, that they now have the choice to convey that to the other characters in the group or not. And I don't know how many times I've had to call people on their metagaming when I've described the high dice roll result from somebody with a perception check, and then they just assume that their character has been told. It's like, no, unless that person decides to tell you, you don't know, because you didn't roll that. So yeah, that's one of my pet peeves.
Fred, any dice rolling philosophies?
Well, I mean, let's get real. Dice rolling philosophies are only as good as they are for you. And frankly, I kind of come to the conclusion that whatever dice rolling philosophies I have or somebody else has are like junk. Like, they're not useful to people. Now, to give you an idea of what I mean is like, I don't fudge dice anymore, but I used to fudge dice. And I'm not going to give people a hard time because they fudged the dice rolls, because I know why I fudged dice when I did it. It's because I was afraid of the dice. I thought, oh God, the dice are going to roll and that character's going to die, and then are they going to bawl and cry at my table? I've seen that before. Are they going to get upset? Are they going to be angry with me? Are they going to leave the table and never want to come back again? And then, like, what do I do? So it's always been fear in terms of fudging dice. So I feel like that's like a journey. And so my philosophy around rolling dice and fudging dice has changed. And I feel like everybody else should be given leeway to be wherever they need to be along that spectrum. And I don't care how long it takes them. And if they even shift, if they stay in the same place, then they stay in the same place. Because I get why people wanted to fudge dice. I just don't give a shit anymore, frankly, what the dice do. I like the surprise of the dice now. And actually, to a large extent, I'm much more open to the idea of not rolling dice as much as I had in the past. And so when it comes to DC 5, which is very easy, like, what the heck am I wasting my time getting anybody to roll that one? Or DC 10, which is easy. I'm like, again, it's an easy thing. Why are we rolling dice for that? So I just don't bother with that. Wizards of the Coast has got a lot of pre-made adventures, and they have very low dice rolls. I see 10s constantly within their adventures. So I either ignore those dice rolls, I was like, Wizards of the Coast, marked as 10, don't worry about rolling dice. Or I think, Wizards of the Coast, marked it as 10, I'm going to ignore them, don't be stupid, it's not going to be a 10 to find a secret door, and it's going to be a 20. I'm going to change it. So I guess that's how I sort of approach a lot of the dice rolling stuff. When it comes to players rolling dice, I prefer for them to wait for me to tell them when they need to roll dice, because I'm not going to fall back on the dice every single time. Sometimes I just want it to work. There are times I have found there are some players who love to roll dice. And I had somebody who did this to me quite a lot, and other people have too. And like, can I make an intelligence roll to see if I understand that the giant spikes sticking out of the floor might hurt me? Because I've got an intelligence of 8. I'm like, dude, you've got an intelligence of 8. I mean, it might be not 10, but you're not a moron. You must understand this, but I want to roll the dice. And I'm like, okay, fine, roll the dice. And they roll really low, and they're like, I got a 2. And I'm like, okay, what do you want to do with this? And they'll say, do I impale myself on the spikes? I'm like, sure, you can do that. Yeah. So sometimes I just don't fight it. When they want to roll the dice, there are other times when people want to roll dice, and it's an impossible task. Like, I want to lasso the moon and pull it down to the planet. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not really the kind of game I'm playing, and they roll really high, as people have suggested. I don't set DCs above 30, because 30 is near impossible. So that means that anything above 30 is impossible. So why am I setting a DC of more than 30? So I just don't bother with 30s above. And frankly, I don't like 30s full stop, but anything above that, like, why am I bothering? And then I have played a lot of chess, I've played a lot of card games, I've played a lot of board games, and I've come to the conclusion for myself that Dungeons and Dragons is not a game of skill. It's a game of risk assessment and probabilities. It's a gambling game where you roll dice. You may have some decisions that you make, but I've seen people make all the good, really good decisions, and the dice have just pulverized them. And the dungeon masters rolled 20s, and they haven't been able to roll above a 5 all night long, no matter what. So for me, Dungeons and Dragons is not a game of skill. It's a game of gambling. And if you're going to use dice, it's sort of like another part of the storytelling element, which has got this strange sort of wild card elements to it. Games of true skill are chess and games where you don't roll dice. I remember going to a board gaming club, and they looked at me when I showed up with Dungeons and Dragons, and I wanted to run a Dungeons and Dragons game here, and they said, "We don't really play games here. We usually play like games of true skill. We don't roll dice. If there's dice, we don't play those games." And I was like, "Oh, okay, all right." He said, "If you want to play Dungeons and Dragons with other people, that's fine, but we're not really that interested." So I've come to the conclusion that for me, the dice are just an element to it, and it's like going and shooting crabs to a large extent when playing Dungeons and Dragons. And so, yeah, that's sort of how I see the game in terms of dice nowadays.
That's fair. I agree in that, like, the fact that we roll dice to determine some outcomes makes D&D a chaotic game. Also, Flutes Loot wanted me to mention that his point was also going to be he doesn't fudge dice anymore, which he already talked about. So, on to my thing now.
You really just flew right over him. Right?
I'd just like to say for the people at home that fudging means to fake the dice results. So you roll the dice in the cover, and the players haven't seen it, and you give them a different result from the one that appeared on the dice. That's what fudging means.
Thank you, AJ.
Actually,
I didn't even think of that.
You need to physically roll die into fudge batter at the table. And that's canonically what it's supposed to be.
And you bake it, and then you eat it.
Grief.
And
So,
plastic poisoning.
The fact that you roll dice can make D&D games very chaotic. And my point's going to tie very closely to Alex's, in that when I was starting out, I would often call for dice rolls, just because, I didn't know what the good amount of dice rolling was. And what this often resulted in was the, experienced players who'd come to my table with, well thought out characters. They had a certain, they were heroes, they weren't clowns. But the fact that I kept making them roll certain things made the game very shticky, this person who was clearly supposed to be a professional, something they had done for years, was suddenly making stupid mistakes, tripping, falling over things, just because we were rolling dice so much and they were not getting those rolls. So something I learned myself, in addition to, I call for dice rolls less, is specifically when player characters have a well thought out backstory, and particularly a profession. I'll consider would their profession play into this? And I guess tools as well. We've talked about this in other DM round tables. It's would their profession help them in this situation basically without a role? If that's the case, I let them be the professional they've come up with, and they are able to pick the lock of a chest that is shoddily made, or break down a door because they understand the weak point in the wood. There are understanding the experience of the characters and their own knowledge base helps reduce the amount of dice you'll have to roll at the table. And another one I want to give a shout out to, but I'm not going to go too in depth into, is like degrees of success and failure. That was one I recently came across again, and it was like, I should try incorporating this. The quick summary of that is, you know, the DC is 16 to hit a monster. You roll the dice, you get 15. It's not quite a hit, but if we go with the degree of success or failure, maybe we'll say you hit anyway. But you've like lodged your sword into their armor somehow, so they're going to have advantage on their attack against you next turn. So it's like, failure doesn't always mean failure. It might mean success with some consequences. If anybody wants to go into more detail about that, feel free to. I'm going to pass it over to Anthony.
That actually brings me to what I was going to talk about, which is kind of failing forward with skill checks and whatnot, and how like a failed skill check doesn't mean like you grind to a halt, but that also comes into like game design philosophy and how you're building out your dungeons and whatnot, and trying to avoid putting things that are necessary for the plot to move forward behind a possible failure. Just have it move forward. It's quite simple. But yeah, so, you know, have your skill checks be degrees of success. I think that's a good way to keep things moving. But I also love like monumental successes, and like critical hits on a skill check isn't a thing, but I like using them because it's a natural 20. It should be celebrated. It's fun. And the game, you know, it's a game. It's supposed to be fun. So let's have fun with it. But yeah, I love using like elements of luck. Oh, sorry, Trevor. No fun allowed. My bad. I love using the elements of luck in a game, like for items and like homebrew spells and that kind of thing, like throwing in dice rolls to potentially change how an item or spell could be used, just to mix things up a bit, because I love the chaotic nature of D&D.
Yeah, actually, I like the degrees of success is one of those things that I hadn't really heard of until I started playing. I played a game called Morkborg, and that's how that game is. You know, it's like 20 is a full hit, but everything else is like lesser degrees. And I really like that philosophy. And it's sometimes it's tough to bring it over to D&D, but I've been trying to do that as well, just because I do like that. It's like, especially it doesn't make sense. Like in combat, you know, I literally had a whole campaign. I played not a whole campaign, a whole session where I didn't hit once in combat. We had 2 big combat encounters. I didn't make a single hit. You know, I was a paladin. Like I was a fairly experienced paladin. It's just like you're telling me I'm gonna miss every single swing I take that entire day. You know, especially after a day where I made, like, you know, the session before that I made a bunch of good hits. And so like I like what, like, you can bring in that, like, okay, well, you didn't, you know, maybe you didn't get your full hit, but you only missed by a little bit. So, you know, you did some damage. You did something, instead of just making him like totally incompetent for an entire session because D&D Beyond hates me, apparently.
Alex,
That's
you've
your
got to
first
understand,
mistake
if you
using
play
digital dice.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to say that, but the first thing you'll know, if you play long enough Dungeons and Dragons in a role-play game, you're going to have a day where nothing connects. Like, everything just goes wrong. You play long enough, it happens. You just had it sooner than maybe other people have. I've had that happen to me more than a few times. You just sit there. In fact, it happened to me so much at one point, I got one of my friends to help me build a wizard, and the only thing the wizard would cast was magic missile, because I couldn't possibly miss, because there was no dice roll with magic missile, and that's all I ever did was cast magic missile.
It's vicious mockery over and over and over. I feel it. Yeah, I know. I was just about there too. I'm just like, I would have to have more success, like falling into people and doing damage. Yeah, I basically at this point, like, I hate rolling on D&D Beyond, because there's something about that site that just does not like me. I had like a couple sessions in a row where just like nothing was working. I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna roll physically. I'll put my camera on it.
One of our castmates in Play Dicely, we think he has the red number pack installed in Roll20, where he just keeps rolling ones constantly. It's very funny when it happens.
AJ, any thoughts on dice rolling from you?
Oh, buddy. I actually design dice and get them manufactured over in China. You can buy some of them on Amazon from BestCon. So, dice. First of all, you're asking about my personal dice philosophy. I have a lot of dice superstitions, which we haven't talked about yet, but I think it's important to address. For instance, if you've got a failed dice roll and I notice that the player has rolled the dice on their character sheet, I'll tell them that's why it failed, because you rolled on your character sheet. I'll actually instigate superstitions into players. I've had people had their dice blessed by me. I've had my dice blessed by Ed Greenwood's beard, and things like that. So don't get me wrong, I'm definitely a dice fanatic, and a diceless game it's an anathema to my soul. However, if you come at me with a new concept for an RPG and it's based around a clever dice mechanic that you've got, get out of my house. I don't want to hear it. I've heard so many of those over the years that I'm over it, man. Come up with a good world story, a setting story, and a compelling different aspect to it, or something really interesting and mechanically wise, but dice rolling, no. I've got a few notes. So if you force a lot of traps that the characters get caught out by because they're not asking for dice rolls all the time, then you're gonna end up with a problem called trap shy players who force dice rolls all the time. And one of the ways that you can deal with players asking for a dice roll, like, I want to make a perception check, I want to do this, I want to roll persuasion, is it takes time for your character to do that in the game. So what they're essentially saying is, we had a mechanic that used to be a lot more popular in earlier editions called taking 10 or taking 20, where you spend time and you automatically get a 10 result or a 20 result on your dice roll, theoretical dice roll. So when a player is asking you to do that, essentially they're taking time, and everybody else in the party is just like, you know, you're going to try picking the lock again, or you're going to try, like, why are you observing this table intensely? Like, what about this table? Well, I got bitten by a table once. It's like, you know, character's never heard of a mimic. The character who knows about mimics is going to be very, very strange. It's like, why are you poking every flagstone with a 10-foot pole? So be aware that that's kind of your responsibility too, as a dungeon master, to handle that. Where you get characters who become dice shy or dice happy. So yeah, bring it more back into your ball court, asking for dice rolls, and don't kowtow to players asking for dice rolls all the time, or penalize them in a meaningful sort of way. That doesn't make any sense if you don't have any sense of pacing in your game, or you don't have anything like wandering monsters, or monsters that can hear something that's happening in the other room, for instance. Yeah, like if characters are like having a big long conversation about a secret door that they've just discovered, and the monsters will be able to hear them, you know, having that big long conversation. The other one is role play versus role play. So if a player at the table is really good at narrating what their character can do, if they're actually persuading the NPC in character, don't make them roll a dice on it. Just judge it and say, oh yeah, you win over the NPC. Another way to do that is to determine what the attitude of the NPC is from the get-go. I've designed dice to do that. It's a basic emotional state dice. So it determines what the NPC's emotional state is when they first meet the player characters. It's a very interesting way of handling it. It's like, maybe you've met an NPC and they're in a state of sorrow because they've lost a family member, you know, or something like that. Has a big influence on things. The other one is not all players are the same, so some players really just prefer to roll a dice than roleplay, and that's fine. And you don't have to treat all the players the same. It's not an even playing field, and you know, after a while playing with a group, which players are good at that sort of thing and which aren't, and let the players who build their characters to be a persuasive, talking thespian character get away with that sort of thing. Perfect case in point is Acquisitions Incorporated game, and Patrick Rothfuss's character doing ridiculous acrobatic stunts and things like that, because that's what his character is built for. What ho swings off a chandelier? If a chandelier is not available, the DM will import one into wherever it is, or a chandelier equivalent, so that Patrick Rothfuss could get away with his bullshit. And actually, some of the actual players jokingly said that it was just ridiculous that Chris Perkins would let Patrick Rothfuss's character get away with murder. And that comes back to character builds and agency. Some characters are built to be skill-based characters, and they rely on their dice roll ability. So in that case, even if they are a particularly good role player, let them be a role player sometimes, and let them say, oh, my character could do that as a skill check or something like that. So yeah. The other thing is back to when I was talking about narrating skill checks. So you talk about where that it becomes a narrative interlude where you talk about the character's background, like, oh, I want to interpret this text. Well, back when you were in the Wizard Academy and you were talking to Master Fanion about the elven text and stuff like that, and you actually build the world, and as a reward for allowing you to build the world, you give a pass for that character. So it's like, or you let them narrate their character's backstory, and if it's particularly good or engaging, give them a success, because you're rewarding their role playing, and you're rewarding their investment into your world and their cooperation in building it. So that sort of thing really, really engages your players, and when they know that just talking about the world and building up their character's backstory actually gives them mechanical successes in the game. So that's good.
A lot of dice rolling knowledge from AJ. Well, before we move on to the next question there, AJ, you brought up a good point. Does anybody want to talk about any dice superstitions? I had a DM once who was like, any D20 that falls off the table, automatic 1.
Microwave. Stick them in the microwave, apparently, and you got to have them up a particular way, and you turn on the microwave, heat up the dice, and it changes the molecules. I remember listening to this dice superstition from one of my friends, and he would swear by it, and it was quite entertaining. If anything, I was always waiting for him to turn it on for too long and the dice to explode inside the microwave, but never did, unfortunately.
There's actually a grain of truth in that, because a lot of dice are constructed by getting plastic granules and then melting them in a container, and sometimes just the outer layer of it melts, so the inside is actually made up of just it's got air bubbles and things like that. That's why you float your dice and determine the balance of it and stuff. Translucent dice that you can see through, never an issue. Metal dice, never an issue. A lot of 3D printed dice and stuff, not really an issue either. But yeah, and those sort of cheapo dice with lots of swirls and stuff through them, that's a particular problem. And microwave them may actually melt the inside of the dice and fix that. So
there you go.
I think the only superstition I have is I have a set of dice that I use for DMing and a set of dice I use for playing, and they do not cross over, because every time I've done a crossover, they roll horribly.
I always have 4 D20s out, and I switch between, and if I insult one, I have to compliment it before I okay, to be fair, I have Jewish ancestry, so I'm automatically more superstitious than other people, and I grew up an athlete, so I absolutely believe that dice get vindictive at times. You start rolling, it's 1, 3, 7, 1, 7. Okay, you're gone. Next one up.
They're like, who hurt you?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like,
and so
your dice got tired. It needs to rest. I've had people, what's the one? Resting your dice in some concentrated water under moonlight.
I always joke about it needing to be blessed by a druid on a full moon in the fall.
It's always going to be a full moon.
And I love those dice timeout chairs that they sell. You have to 3D print them and all this stuff. I want to get. I see so many different ones that I want. But dice jail, the dunce corner.
Do any of you use a dice tower? I've never seen the point of them myself.
No.
It's to hear the clickety clack.
I was say I think it's just more just like it's another thing that you can justify, like, oh, I need a dice tower, babe. I need a dice tower, like because it's it's cool. You get it because it looks cool, but I need it so I have real rolls because I can't just shake my hand and and I but I want one just because they look cool, but I cannot justify it. I do have a cool rolling bat that has like a dapper octopus on it. It's got like an octopus at the top hat. It's awesome. I got it at Comic-Con.
To be fair,
this is a solid 20, a solid D20 made of metal. That is, I think if it was slightly larger, it would be classified as an actual weapon.
That's awesome.
I've never actually used this on any sort of surface that was not like foam, rubber, or silicon or something like that. But yeah, this is one serious mamma jamma.
I just got
it in a dice tower.
I got a set of dice a while ago that I haven't been able to use because COVID. But the game I'm playing in now with Dice Goblins, we're physically rolling. And it's a metal set, and it's like this cool like steampunky die. I love them. And it's so satisfying rolling these metal die because it's like dunk dunk dunk. Oh, it feels so good rolling them. I love it.
Almost makes up for rolling a 1.
Almost.
This dice,
almost.
This dice here. If you guys have never heard of this infamous looking thing, I don't know how focused this can be. But it's actually it's a perfect DM's dice because they never know what number you're looking at, and this actually rolls all of the numbers increments like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 all the way up to like I don't know, huge numbers. It's fairly simple to read once you get used to what all these different symbols mean, but it allows you to roll lots of different dice results with one toss of the die, and
that's awesome.
I highly recommend it.
Honestly, looking at it as someone with dyslexia, I hate it so much just looking at it.
yeah.
It sounds cool, but just looking at it, I hate it.
How about you, Trevor? Any superstitions?
Absolutely not.
I expected nothing less.
I'll pick up any dice, I'll roll the dice, and I don't give a damn.
Oh.
I'm not beholden to some dice god. I don't eat dice. I don't put them in the little corner. I don't put the dunce cap on them. I don't do nothing. I'll roll the dice.
Face.
That's it.
That's the emotional state dice, the 12 cardinal emotions dice that I designed, by the way.
That's actually really cool, like genuinely.
That's what I feel like I want to get.
Yeah, that's totally like because then you could just roll real quick, like, hey, you approach a NPC, he's angry.
They're always
for those
angry.
of you who roll a D8 for the cardinal directions, this is a cardinal direction dice. So simple you would not believe that nobody manufactured those before, but there you go. And these are one of my favorites actually, because I hate generating random names on the fly. So these are it's a vowel dice and consonant dice, so you can just randomly roll random words.
That's probably how they came out, like Drizzt.
Exactly.
Wow.
By the way, it's okay.
I just didn't realize how many dice there were.
Oh yeah.
As if we needed more.
I've had people pissed off when I pick up 2d10s and they're not like the 0 and the it's like I'm using both the ones and I'm like, well, how do you know? It's like, well, I picked that one as the 10s before I roll it.
You need to
choose.
I need to run some Dungeon Crawl Classics for y'all, because in that game there's D4, D5, D6, D7, D10, D12, D14, D16, D20, D24, and D30.
That's why this is so good, because you don't have to go and track down those dice. It's got all of them in this one dice.
Wow. And that wraps up our discussion of dice philosophies. Are there any particular dice philosophies that you as a DM or player bring to your table? Well, we'd love to hear about it down in the comments below. And be sure to check out all the YouTube channels of our guests that appeared in this video. You can find links to their channels down in the description below. And be sure to leave a subscribe here as well for when the next Dungeon Master Roundtable comes up. And until next time, may you always play dicely.